Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's lovely to be back in Nijmegen. I've been asked to talk about the role of transparency in process improvement, and I will do that. But before I do that, I need to present to you a problem, a paradox, and see if you can help me think it through. The paradox is this. I hope you would agree with me that the people who choose to go into the field of medicine, particularly people who choose to be doctors, are among the most well-intentioned people in the world. After all, they devote their lives to alleviating human suffering caused by disease. That's a pretty spectacular thing, that people would choose to spend their lives taking care of us. I think we should be grateful for that. I hope you'll also agree with me that those people who choose to be doctors tend to be of above average intelligence. Any disagreements there? Okay. And also that they go through extensive training. Their regular academic training in secondary school, university, medical school, residency, and even after they become doctors, they participate in continuing medical education. So we have this group of people who are extremely well-intentioned, highly intelligent, very well-trained. And the paradox is this. How is it that that group of people, when working together in the hospitals around the world, whether here in the Netherlands or in the United States, collectively represent one of the largest public health hazards? And by that I mean they collectively kill thousands of patients per year. Patients who don't die because of their disease, but who die because of the treatment or lack of treatment they get in hospitals. Clearly, it's not a matter of those doctors not caring because they're well-intentioned. Clearly, it's not a matter of skill or intelligence because they're highly trained and very thoughtful people. So why is it that this happens, and what can we do about it? Well, this question was actually answered in a famous movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. I don't know how many of you remember that movie. Do any of you remember that movie? Raise your hands if you remember that movie. Okay. This is a generational issue because the movie was in the 1960s, and it was a comedy. It had some of the world's greatest comedians in it, and one of them was Ethel Merman. Do you remember Ethel Merman, the comedian? And at one point in the movie, Milton Berle comes up to her. Something bad has happened, and he says, "It was a terrible thing. It was a terrible thing, but these things happen." And Ethel Merman, playing Mrs. Marcus, gets very upset, and she says, "Now, what kind of an attitude is that? These things happen. They only happen because this whole country is just full of people who, when these things happen, they just say, these things happen. And that's why they happen. We got to have control of what happens to us." And what I'd like to suggest to you, and I mean this with great affection and respect for doctors and nurses and people like that, is we have come to expect that in hospitals, people will be harmed. We believe, perhaps doctors believe this because they're scientists, they believe that there is a statistically irreducible amount of harm that has to occur in hospitals. It just happens. Now, I agree that there is a statistically irreducible amount of harm that has to occur in hospitals. I just don't think we're anywhere near that number. I think there's a great degree of harm that occurs in hospitals that doesn't have to, that's preventable. In the United States, I don't have the numbers for the Netherlands, in the United States, 100,000 people per year die preventably in American hospitals. 100,000 a year. Now, it's hard for people to imagine 100,000 as a number. As human beings, we usually can only visualize 10 to the third. We can visualize a meter, we can visualize a kilometer, we can visualize a millimeter. But we can't visualize 100,000 kilometers. Likewise, we can visualize a person and 1,000 people, but we can't visualize 100,000 people. So in the U.S., 100,000 people is equivalent to a 727 airliner crashing every day and killing everybody on board. That's what it means. Now, if that were to happen in the airline industry, after about 3 days, we would shut down all the airports, and we would say, what's wrong with the pilots, what's wrong with the airplanes, and so on. The equivalent number, and by the way, it is the equivalent number here in the Netherlands and elsewhere, occurs proportionally, occurs every day, but it's dispersed, it's spread out, and we don't do anything about it, or we don't do much about it. After all, we have a hospital. Our job is to make people better, not kill them. Transparency is not about competition among hospitals. It's about holding yourself accountable to the standard you say you believe in. We believe the only way to succeed as an institution is to be public about where we are not succeeding. The only way to improve is to admit where you are failing. Now let's talk about the value of mistakes. This is a serious problem for people in the medical profession, for doctors, because doctors are actually taught in medical school and in their training that they should not make mistakes. I know of no other profession in the world where people are taught, thou shalt not make a mistake. In most other professions in the world, you're taught, try not to make mistakes, but if you do, learn from them. Doctors are actually taught, don't make mistakes. The second lesson, of course, is that every mistake brings a lesson and an improvement, particularly in the complicated world of hospitals, where most mistakes could happen to anybody. When a doctor or a nurse makes a mistake, it's usually not a mistake of commission where they intentionally do it. After all, it's a mistake. It's not, they didn't plan to make the mistake. It happens. But it could usually happen to anybody. I want to tell you a story from our hospital. One day, a woman who was having orthopedic surgery on her ankle woke up and looked down at her leg and said, why is the bandage on my right leg instead of my left leg? It was at that moment that her surgeon realized he had operated on the wrong leg. There is a technical term for this in the medical profession. The technical term is not good. Right? Now, you can, those of you who are doctors or nurses in the room can imagine how that doctor felt at that moment. He was devastated. He felt terribly. Why? He had taken an oath to do no harm, and he had harmed a patient. What had happened? By the way, the patient wasn't pleased either, but that's obviously. But I'll tell you, at that one moment, it would be hard to distinguish who was more upset. They were both upset in different ways, obviously for different reasons. What had happened? Well, that surgeon had failed to do a timeout before the procedure. A timeout, before a surgery is, do we have the right patient? Do we know what we're doing with this patient? Do we have the correct body part? And so on. He had failed to do that. One of my board members, one of the supervisory board members said to me, what are you going to do to punish that doctor? And I said, nothing. He said, well, he violated one of our procedures. Aren't you going to punish him? I said, there's no punishment I could give that is worse than what he already feels. And one of our senior doctors also said, look, if we're trying to establish a culture in our organization in which people feel comfortable admitting their mistakes and their near mistakes, if we start to punish people who admit those mistakes, we will never hear about them. And therefore, we will not improve as an organization going forward. That creates an organization that wants to get better at getting better. That is not satisfied with a benchmark based on some national average. That's only satisfied when it's knowing that its job is never complete. That its job is to go forward every day and get better at getting better. Thank you very much.